So welcome everyone. I'm really happy to see you all at this Community Safety is in Our Hands training. We're glad it was so popular. We definitely see the need for it all over the country. I'm Rivera's son. I'm the program coordinator for Pace Bene, which is a 34-year-old nonviolence organization, and for Campaign Nonviolence, which is our campaign to mainstream nonviolence. And I'm going to let my colleague Shayna Jones tell you all about that. Shayna.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shayna Jones, the outreach coordinator for Pace Bene, and most of my outreach primarily focuses on our yearly Campaign Nonviolence Action Days. And for those who aren't familiar, Campaign Nonviolence is a project of Pace Bene that has been running for 12 years. Each year, we rally thousands of actions during our action days, which go from International Peace Day, September 21st, to the International Day of Nonviolence, October 2nd. These actions and events address issues such as war, poverty, racism, and environmental destruction. So each year we highlight specific calls to actions as well. This year's calls focus on nonviolence towards self, others, the world, and the environment. Today's particular training fits into the call for nonviolence toward others, protect the vulnerable. And in this call, we hope to equip individuals and groups with the skills needed to promote community safety and intervene in situations of violence or harassment, encouraging them to take action in September and throughout the year. We are fortunate to have the DC Peace Team leading this training, so please feel free to learn more about Action Days and sign up by visiting the link that I'm sharing in the chat right now. So without further ado, I'll hand it back over to Rivera to introduce the trainer and begin the session. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Shayna. Shayna is the person who rallies all these 5,000 groups to hold their events. You will hear from Shayna throughout the year if you sign up for Action Days, but she sends you cool things like tools and resources and knowledge and maybe even some free stickers. So there are perks to organizing with us. Eli McCarthy is a longtime friend of Pace Bene and an amazing human being, first and foremost. He is also the director of the DC Peace Team and a very experienced trainer in nonviolent communication, unarmed civilian protection, bystander intervention, and a long list of other skills that come in handy when you're trying to stop violence from happening. Eli is a professor at Georgetown University in the Justice and Peace Studies program. He's an author of A Just Peace Ethic and Becoming Nonviolent Peacemakers. His work has been shaped by his experiences in Haiti with people experiencing homelessness and leading nonviolent resistance campaigns of actually quite a variety of issues and in locations as well. So Eli, thank you so much for joining us. We're really honored to have you here, and we really look forward to learning from your wealth of knowledge and experience.
Well, thank you, Rivera. It's wonderful to be with you all. Today, we're going to focus on the possibilities of conflict being constructive, that it can help us grow, become better people, and more empathetic, as well as safer as well. So just a little intro to DC Peace Team, and then we will get into kind of an overview of unarmed civilian protection, and then we will have a number of tactics that we'll go through, a chance to do a role play, a couple breakout sessions, and so forth. Just a quick thing is I kind of look back to what got me involved in some of this work. I remember kind of being just a little guy at home and starting to notice like my parents have arguments. And eventually these arguments kind of escalated, and I would at times be like, "Oh, mom, like don't say that," or "Dad, just say this one time." And I never really intervened, but I started to kind of wonder, like, what does peacemaking kind of look like, and how do we care for each other and learn to love each other? So the DC Peace Team got started in about 2011, and we were co-founded by an amazing fella named Cortez McDaniel, who grew up in some neighborhoods in DC where there was some struggle, and he ended up being in prison for a while. And he came out and he wanted to do some really constructive work in the community And he ended up taking a training with some of us through the Nonviolent Peace Force, and he got really excited. He was like, "Hey, we can do this right here in DC." We were like, "Cortez, what do you see?" So one of his first ideas was a thing called Safe Passage, basically helping kids get to school in neighborhoods where fights were breaking out or shootings might occur. So we would support that with volunteers and young adults. And now our focus is really on kind of cultivating the habits and the skills of nonviolence in our daily life. So our communities can better then resist injustice and also build like a more sustainable kind of just peace. So let me share with you just a couple images here to kind of get us started. Um, so we do three basic kind of programs. We have a set of nonviolent skill trainings. So today's kind of unarmed civilian protection. We also do bystander intervention and de-escalation, nonviolent communication for interpersonal conflict, restorative justice, particularly circle processes, anti-racism, trauma awareness, and meditation. So Elian is one of our top trainers there in the top left. The top right picture was from a Black Lives Matter demonstration in DC around 2020. Bottom left was one of the election demonstrations around 2020, 2021. So I'll share a little bit more about our community safety units that are deployed kind of in the neighborhood and sort of more ongoing projects as well. And then the last thing we do is we offer restorative circles for different groups. Various groups will refer people to us, like the Network for Victims Recovery of DC or the National Association of Returning Citizens and so forth. So if you want to find out more, dcpeaceteam.org, you can sign up for our e-list, get updates on online or in-person trainings and other opportunities. And we're grateful to be part of the Shanti Sena Network, which is a network of like 15 to 16 orgs around the US, some in Canada, that deploy these unarmed civilian protection units in different cities and towns. And some of them are do international work as well. All right, so before we kind of jump into some of the content and breakouts and so forth, I just want to invite everyone to take a few moments of centering, to take some deep breaths together, kind of relax your body. You're welcome to rest your eyes if you like, and just to focus in on our breathing and of letting go of other distractions or anxieties or deadlines. Just to sense the gift of being here together. When you're ready, you can bring your attention back to the group. So, a few kind of guidelines to help us proceed today. Um, in sort of de-escalation moments, there are sometimes some gray areas where it's not crystal clear how to deal with every kind of situation. So we welcome a diversity of perspectives on some of these dynamics and kinds of tactics that may work or may be less likely. So please feel invited to share your wisdom throughout this process. Also, when we are having some discussion, be mindful of how much time we're taking when we share and to create space for many to jump in. If we're a little more kind of introverted like myself, encourage us to stretch and enter into the discourse and maybe some of the areas that aren't crystal clear to kind of figure out together. It is going to be a bit of a process. We have about an hour and a half, so this is We will be building on certain components. We do have longer trainings that go into sort of more depth and more intense situations, but this will be a good kind of intro. And then, invite you to be present as best that you can. And certainly if you need to take a break, you're welcome to do so. So here is a brief roadmap. We're going to start with some experiences. I'm going to invite you into small groups here in a moment to kind of do some intros and maybe share any examples of unarmed civilian protection that you've been part of. These are usually groups or teams that are kind of deployed to different events or kind of neighborhood situations, or maybe just stories that you've heard about like that. If you can't think of anything particularly in that area, you could maybe share a story of just a situation where you were a bystander and how you intervened or how you de-escalated and so forth. And then we will share a little bit of that. I'll share some broader examples. We'll go into some orienting themes for this work and some kind of arching strategies. And then we'll spend a good chunk of our time looking at about 10 or 12 different de-escalation tactics and do a role play and breakout to kind of work with and integrate them into our approach. So before we go into our first breakout room, I do want to put something in the chat box here. This is going to be a summary document of kind of what we're going to go through today, and this will be emailed out to you afterwards as well. But if you'd like to follow along with it while we're together, you are welcome to do so. So, Rivera, would you set us into breakout groups of about 4 or 5 people and simply share your name, kind of where you're based, where you're located, and then any examples of unarmed civilian protection that you've been part of or heard about, or maybe just examples of kind of bystander intervention with, one-on-one or kind of a smaller group situation. And
Eli, for folks who don't know what those terms are, is there another way to describe bystander intervention or unarmed civilian protection that might give them a clue what we're thinking about?
yeah, so unarmed civilian protection is when you are part of a team or a unit and you're deployed to like a political demonstration or a neighborhood event or kind of an ongoing neighborhood like farmers market, for example, and you're working to prevent violence, de-escalate harmful conflict, and so forth. Bystander intervention sometimes uses similar skills, but it's a little more kind of random, right? You're walking down the street or you're on the subway or you're at a party and somebody else is getting harassed and you happen to be there as a bystander. How can you de-escalate, shift the energy in that kind of moment? So those are kind of the distinctions.
Great, thank you. And how long are people going to be in breakout rooms for?
Just about 7 minutes would be good.
Okay, great. Here we go. I'm going to open all the rooms. If anything goes wrong tech-wise, just get back to this main room and I'll sort you out. There you go.
Looking forward to hearing some of the examples. All right. I think we've got everybody here. So we'll take a couple moments to kind of open it up and see if anybody has a brief example of kind of community safety unit work, or maybe just a kind of a bystander intervention example, and particularly like what kind of tactics seem to be helpful in that moment, or what tactic like just really did not work and you're like, okay, I'm not going to try that again. So the floor is open if anyone wants to share an example.
I can share one. This is one I heard about recently.
Mhm.
So this happened in Washington, D.C., and there was a woman getting out of her car going to work at a school. She was a school nurse, and ICE agents came and tried to take her away. And the principal came out at that moment and said, "Do you have a warrant?" And they said no, and they left. And then there was communication around the neighborhood, and someone called various immigration groups and asked people to come to the school at the end of the day to be present to help to walk the students and teachers and other employees out of the building. And so about 30 people showed up, and it turned out the ICE agents didn't come back. But what was effective was that the principal knew what to say, and the principal was present, paying attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Margaret. That's a great example, right? So a critical question or a reflective question like, do you have a warrant? Right? That is a way to delay. It's also a way to kind of bring in some legal parameters. And in this case, they backed off, but there were other steps like having a rapid response network of people that will come and show up. I guess they asked them to come a little later in the day, and then actual accompaniment, right? Being present, accompanying the children or the staff to try to increase a sense of safety. Excellent. Kelly?
Example's more kind of a pre-planning, but in 1990, I did nonviolence training for a group of people that were going to help protect a reenactment. This is the celebration of or commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the overthrow of the Queen of Hawaii. And there's 3-day reenactment of the events related to that, and great fear that tourists or non-Hawaiians might want to attack the event. So I did some training back then. My skills are rusty now, but I was a nonviolence trainer. And I remember a moment where this real big Hawaiian guy said he was there because he wanted to protect people, but he wasn't sure he could remain peaceful in doing that. And it was very important to him as a Hawaiian that this event be peaceful. And he said, what am I going to do if some other big guy is coming out of the crowd headed for the actors in the reenactment and, ready to do some violence? And I walked up to him and I said, well, you're a big guy. One thing you could do is you could try this. And I gave him a bear hug. And, we had talked ahead of time about, is it okay to touch and things like that. But I gave him a big bear hug. And I said, now try to break out of this. And he had to struggle to do it. He was 3 times my size. But what I learned from that was that just having a little bit of practice with skills you have that you hadn't thought of, or somebody showing you how de-escalation works, made such a difference in the actual event because people went in confident that it would be peaceful, and it was.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, long-winded.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kelly. Yeah, good example about preparation, about training, broadening the imagination about what de-escalation can look like. And we will talk a little bit today about the role of kind of physical gestures and movements with this tactic we call interposition as well. All right, let me share with you some other examples via a video, which will kind of introduce this practice in kind of the international space, and then we will bring it back down here to kind of some local examples as well. So this is a video that was created by the Nonviolent Peace Force, which is the largest organization in the world that deploys unarmed civilian protection primarily to many war zones like Ukraine and Myanmar and South Sudan and so forth. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play it. If for some reason you can't hear, just like let me know in the chat box. It'll be a little quiet at first.
the beginning of the 20th century, the majority of fatalities in conflict were soldiers. And we fast forward 100 years, and the majority of fatalities are actually civilians. And so the way we approach peacekeeping and civilian protection has to shift.
In a place like South Sudan, where since December of 2013, a very serious civil war has displaced millions of people and tens of thousands of people have been killed. When women are moving out to collect firewood or to collect water or other things that they need, they're often targeted for sexual violence as a way to use rape as a weapon of war. In most cases, we see no incidents of violence as long as they're with a protective accompaniment team.
It was quite a surprise. People with weapons coming in saying like, you guys go, you guys go. And we said like, we're not leaving. They would hit the women and children. If we had a gun in those instances, we were like, like an armed peacekeeper, we probably would have been killed.
So this organization, Nonviolent Peace Force, is one of about 60 organizations now that we know of around the world that are deploying unarmed civilian protection units, doing accompaniment in some really significant conflicts. This practice of unarmed protection is primarily the physical protection, direct physical protection and accompaniment of those who are in danger, particularly civilians. And the focus is on things like preventing violence, sometimes enabling nonviolent resistance campaigns or movements, rehumanizing parties in a really intense, dehumanizing conflict, building empathy, and strengthening like local peace groups or institutions or leaders so that they can do their work at an even more effective kind of rate. So we saw in the video some examples of like accompanying women going to get firewood or water in a war zone where they were regularly like sexually abused or assaulted, and having this presence with the uniform, the vest, and that kind of skill set was able to prevent that from happening when they were present. But there's also another example in there about attack, a pretty significant attack on a UN compound where like 40 to 50 people got shot. And these 14 women and children kind of snuck into this mud hut to try to escape. And there were two Nonviolent Peace Force officers with them, Derek and Andreas, and these armed actors came in with their AK-47s and said, "You two out of here. We want these women and children." And they could have very easily just been shot and that was it. But they stood up and said, "No, we're not leaving. We're unarmed. We're humanitarian. We're nonpartisan." And it kind of shocked the armed actors. They were expecting either hostility or passivity, and instead they got assertiveness, confidence, and they backed out and they came back two more times, same demand and same response from Derek and Andreas, and these women and children survive that particular attack. So there are a number of other examples around the world, like accompanying human rights activists, particularly like in Colombia and Guatemala, groups that accompany refugees or migrants, school children, negotiators, humanitarian aid groups, and then, in some of our neighborhoods in DC and other neighborhoods in the US, groups that provide community safety at political demonstrations. In DC, we are hired by a local group to be the community safety unit at an arts night, which is just a bunch of artists around town put out their stuff during a weekend, but there's lots of people around. And instead of them sort of hiring the police per se, they hire this community safety unit, in our case, here in DC. We also are hired by the farmers markets, where there are people who sometimes hang around the market who have different kinds of struggles, and sometimes conflicts arise. And I'll share a little more detail about that particular example. And then there are violent interrupters that are hired by groups like Cure Violence and other similar approaches that really focus on shootings and homicides in cities like Chicago and Baltimore and DC. And they interrupt gang violence and have reduced shootings 40 to 70% in the neighborhoods that they work in. So that's kind of a broad range of examples. And there are a lot of other ones we might kind of think about where this kind of practice and training and skills are critical. So let me, I want to go back to a couple slides here in a moment and just kind of walk you through this one project that we call Community Safety Unit at our farmers market. So a number of cities, have farmers markets. In DC, we have a market in what's called Columbia Heights Civic Plaza. It's kind of right in the kind of center of DC. Lots of people around, three-way intersection, small restaurants, a couple apartment buildings. But there's also 15 to 20 people who kind of spend time there who are struggling with different things, like broken families or drinking too much or other drugs or mental health challenges or being unhoused or being undocumented. And occasionally they would get into arguments, sometimes fistfights. And people kept calling the police to come into this space, and they would get detained. Someone would be out of jail, and then they would just kind of come back, and it just kept cycling. So eventually, some of our members in the DC Peace team got to know some of the community organizers in this space. And then there's a public safety committee that the sort of neighborhood commission runs. And as they got to know us, they invited us into the plaza to try to maybe provide an alternative way of responding to this dynamic. So after consulting with all the stakeholders, it seemed to be a wise kind of move. And these are the three objectives of this project. And we've been there since August 2021. And they are to improve community relations and imagination around public safety. Second, to prevent violence and harmful conflict through nonviolent responses. And third, to connect people to resources as we get to know their stories and situations. So like housing or detox or treatment or jobs. So we've been there for about 3 years. The farmers market soon kind of hired us on as their formal community safety unit. So we're there about a couple of days a week when the market's there. We've done over 270 de-escalations over the 3 years, including 5 or 6 times somebody's pulled a knife out on another person. We've been able to get them apart and diffuse and prevent the harm from happening. This is kind of a picture of the space. This is another kind of angle. So, this is a really important model. We've done this for about 3 years. We've now just been asked to start another project at another farmer's market in a different part of the city, where there's been some, similar kind of dynamics. So we're trying to kind of, replicate it in different spaces as well. So happy to kind of go into that in a little more detail in a moment if you have like particular questions. But let me just walk through some of these orienting themes to unarmed protection, and then we'll start to get into some of the tactics that one can use if you're in situations like this. So these are 5 themes that are often kind of the orienting themes or principles of unarmed protection. So particularly the Nonviolent Peace Force, DC Peace Team. The first one here is the primacy of those most in need and local credibility. So for example, when we're at the plaza, our focus is on those people who seem most at risk of being harassed or harmed. Sometimes it's a person who's maybe drinking a lot and just is having a hard time controlling themselves. They're falling or they're laid out, and people may harass or take advantage. Other times it's maybe older, unhoused persons who are just trying to sort of hang on, and sometimes they get harassed by the younger folks who might be in a similar situation. So who's most in need? Who's most at risk? And the local credibility is really critical, which is both kind of, establishing relationships with the different stakeholders in the community, but also as we get to know folks who are kind of residing in this space, there are usually individuals who have a particular authority or credibility with some of the other individuals who are also on the streets. So, for example, we met someone named Eduardo, and he was someone that a lot of the guys kind of respected and really looked up to. So when a conflict would happen, we would say, "Hey, Eduardo, can you come over here and help us as we try to de-escalate? Or can you talk to this person while we talk to that person?" Right? So there's kind of this mutual accompaniment kind of process or dynamic that happens. The second one is constructive conflict. So this is the idea that conflict can be healthy. It's not about trying to make everyone be quiet or calm, but sometimes there are conflicts that might get a little loud. There might be some swear words, but there's ways that people are working through what's happening. So we're there to, interrupt dehumanization, but also to support conflict that may be constructive. The third one is human dignity. So this is really a critical one, the sense that everybody has this inherent sort of value or dignity. So regardless of what we say or do, we don't lose that dignity. So there's this sense of the unity of all the community or all people in this common characteristic of human dignity. So this invites us to communicate with all parties, even when there's people there who, we might disagree with what they're saying or what they're doing. But dignity invites us into that line of communication. Nonviolence, so this invitation to grow in nonviolence. How can we develop this habit in our daily life? It's not just a rule against sort of using violence, but thinking about how do we treat the people we live with? How do we treat our coworkers or people we go to school with? How do we treat ourselves? What do we consume during the day? All of these choices can develop the habit of active nonviolence that is rooted in humanizing others and empathy and connection. Or we can develop other habits which may make it harder for us to be able to de-escalate in these kind of more difficult moments. So the last one here is nonpartisanship, and this is a intriguing theme within the field of unarmed protection. There is kind of a range of approaches to this. You can think of it as kind of a spectrum, like nonpartisanship on one end and partisanship on the other end. And some organizations will be at different points on that spectrum. And there can be some advantages and disadvantages at any point. But one of the things that we have found is that organizations that do lean more towards partisanship, meaning they like take an explicit side of a party in a conflict and say, you know, we're on this side, we're advocating for what they want to see happen in this conflict and so forth, that can increase the risk for the people doing unarmed protection. That is, the few times that somebody has been like kidnapped or even killed doing this, which is really small, like around maybe 10 or so people, almost always it was when they were doing unarmed protection from kind of a partisan posture. So with nonpartisanship, what we kind of mean by this is it's not about neutrality. It's more about like the flip side of human dignity. If we're going to take the dignity of all people seriously, then there's this kind of multi-partisanship that is trying to kind of work for the good of all the stakeholders involved. What it means also is that this approach is not going to try to determine sort of the outcome of the conflict, or if the parties are in, you know, a pretty large conflict, like in Ukraine or Myanmar or something, or South Sudan, but it's going to create this space where those parties can kind of work out how the conflict, what the agreement looks like, and sort of the political kind of outcome. So one of the advantages with nonpartisanship is it can help us build better trust across different parties and actually get more access to spaces and certain people. Yet there's still this commitment to human rights, so there's a kind of solidarity with those who are most at risk, or whose rights are most at risk. So just a couple examples, and then I'll kind of pause for a moment, is that sometimes there's a conflict between persons, say at the plaza that I was describing, and the power differential can be really significant. So like if the police come into the scene, the police tend to have more power in terms of weapons and kind of legal authority. So like our focus as nonpartisan units would be to focus on the person with less power in that moment. So like the resident who is drinking or is kind of unhoused, for example. Now, if there's a conflict between, let's say, two unhoused persons in the plaza, and there's no like, you know, noticeable power differential, or it might be less stark, then what, you know, we stay near the space and try to work with each person to kind of move through the conflict or stay safe, etc. So the power differential can make an important difference in how we focus and where we put our kind of energy. Okay, I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions before I just kind of review this strategy slide. So are there any questions or reflections based on your own experience that you want to add so far after going through the themes and the example of at the plaza?
And because we're in screen share mode right now, it might be good if you do have a question to come off mute and say it, or to raise your digital hand so we know that you're waving at us. Oh, now we can see you.
Questions? All right, well, let's go into the tactics here, and then we're going to do our first breakout where you have a chance to role play and work with some of these tactics. So kind of bigger picture strategies, which then there are particular tactics within each of these, are these sort of 4 buckets. So at the top right, you've got monitoring, and sometimes this looks like ceasefire monitoring in like the Philippines, for example. Rumor control is really a critical one. It happens in war zones, but it also happens like at the plaza, where there are rumors like somebody stole my phone, or that person beat up this other guy last night. and it can lead to escalation, right? So part of our work is, as we start to hear those things, well, let's see who does have the phone, or what do we know about where the phone was last seen, or do we have any more information about what happened to this guy last night? So it's kind of trying to do rumor control that can be preventative of a kind of more increased kind of escalation. Early warning, early response is also applicable to a broad range of situations. So for example, in the plaza, early warning would be like, the certain people that come into the plaza that we know have had incidents before. We're like, oh, Melvin's here, let's keep an eye on him. Somebody go talk with him, try to see how he's doing before something goes higher, or a particular person is like really escalated, maybe because they're on a certain drug or they're drinking a lot. So we try to do preventative work right before they start pushing somebody or start harassing somebody. So early warning, early response is a really critical piece. Capacity development and recognition is another bucket. This is about training and supporting local infrastructure and groups, relationship building, and proactive engagement. So this can be presence, accompaniment when you're walking with people, like the women going to get firewood or water, or the children at the school. Interpositioning, we will go into more detail. This is different ways we can kind of use our bodies. All right. So let's go into some tactics, and then we will break out in our first kind of role play. So these are 4 initial tactics. We're going to go through about 10 or 12 today. And this is kind of like a toolbox. So it's not like a linear thing where you start with the first one on the list and then you go to the next one and the next one. But you kind of find the ones that sort of fit with your personality, your style, and with the context of the situation as well. And it's often critical to be willing to shift between tactics. Like if we try something and it doesn't seem to really go in a better direction, to try a different tactic. So the first one here is called centering, and this is a really important one in the sense that it's what kind of mechanism can help us to focus, be a little more calm, and like less reactive or defensive in a situation. So people do this in a whole bunch of different ways. It might be taking a few deep breaths. It might be counting to 5, maybe putting your hand on your heart, maybe saying the name of someone who like really inspires you, like grandma or some historical figure, or maybe a value word like courage, compassion. For others, it might be an image or a memory of a moment in your life where people you were with felt really connected, whether it's like a family reunion or hanging out with your cousins at the park or the beach. There's this deeper sense of interconnectedness, or maybe a moment in your life where there's like a very clear sense of purpose or calling. Those can be ways to kind of center us as well. Does anybody have any other examples of how you center? You can feel free to put them in the chat box, or if you want to unmute. And the invitation here is that the more we practice centering in our daily life, the more we're able to like access that energy and that power in these kind of difficult moments of conflict or community safety. Does anybody have any examples you want to share? I see open awareness meditation. Notice what's happening in your body. Yes, critical. Inhale 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 6 seconds, counting to 10. All right. So think about what is it that will help you to center so that you can kind of, access that in these more challenging kind of moments. The next tactic is presence, posture, and eye contact. So sometimes just being visible, being present or more present can start to shift the dynamic when person is being seen or that they notice other people are around. Posture is really important in terms of being assertive and confident, but not being like aggressive and not looking like passive or scared or nervous. So if there's a person who's clearly being harassed, usually valuable to check in with them with eye contact, perhaps, to see if they're okay, if they want any support. Eye contact with an aggressor can sometimes escalate to a little more serious level. So you want to be careful about that. The other thing you can do with your posture is something with your hands. It's called putting one hand out, like something's got to stop or kind of slow down or shift here, and another hand out, but which signals, willing to kind of work with you, try to find a way through this together. So the two hands is a posture that can be helpful. All right, last two, and then we will slide into breakouts. Distraction. Distraction is sort of one of the really creative, artistic expressions of nonviolence. There's a lot of surprising, kind of out of context statements that can be shared. There's one story about these two guys at a bar that were about to fight. They had their hands up. They're, pretty big relatively, and a younger woman who was smaller than both of them kind of like sneaks in between them, and she points at one guy's shirt and she's like, "Oh, I love this shirt on you. Where did you get it? It goes great with your eyes. It's amazing. Where did you get this shirt?" And the guys are like, "What are you doing, lady?" And it was in that moment that then their buddies who were just kind of watching the whole thing come in and pull them both back and say, let's go, it's not worth it, right? So the fight doesn't happen. This woman who's physically smaller than both of them uses distraction, sort of out of context statements. Sometimes it can be things like asking for directions for the time, showing pics of your dog on your phone. Does somebody want some water? Singing a song that's very dramatic or kind of funny. Whole range of possibilities with distraction. Okay, dialogue and empathy. Sometimes we can actually kind of talk it through with folks and, shift the dynamic by the questions we pose and asking, if there's somebody harassed, asking them if they're okay, if they need anything, if they want our help. Sometimes we want to be careful. If they want to work it through, they might not want our help, and we can just kind of hang back and observe. But if the situation is, kind of intensifying and there's clearly the aggressor is starting to get more hostile, or the person who's being harassed says, hey, can you deal with this person or help me out? And you turn to the aggressor. So this is one dialogue method to consider. It's called Clara. The C stands for centering. The L stands for listen. So before we even say or do anything, can we take a moment to try to listen for what's going on in this person who's being aggressive? What might they be feeling? There's a feelings wheel in your summary document, but it has a range of feelings. Like, in the middle, it can be happy or sad, but as it branches out, there could be feelings of irritation, frustration, embarrassment, feeling rejected, feeling agitated, feeling lonely, all sorts of feelings that people can be going through. So we could try to kind of listen for what they might be feeling. We could listen for what might be the experience or the story or the narrative behind what they're saying or doing. But we could also listen for needs. So I'm going to share with you a chart here. It's called a human needs chart. And the logic of this is that most of what we say or kind of do in our lives is to our strategies to try to get different needs met. And we may or may not be aware of these in the moment, but it can be needs like just being heard or being seen, or a need for respect or acknowledgement, or a need for belonging or clarity, or maybe support or maybe safety and boundaries. So invite you to kind of get familiar with this chart if you're not already. And when we're doing Clara or kind of involved in this community safety, if we can try to pick up what might be one or more of the needs behind what this person is saying or doing. So I'm going to give you kind of an example here to practice with this. So when we've done a little bit of listening and maybe we've picked up a feeling, an experience or need, then we can start to acknowledge, verbalize what we're hearing. It doesn't mean we agree with what they're saying or doing, but we're just signaling to them that we acknowledge their humanity or their dignity by naming a feeling, an experience, or a need that we're hearing. So, for example, it might be like, hey, I hear you. It sounds like you're really hoping for some more like respect in this situation. That's, and you see if that kind of shifts the dynamic a bit. And then our respond is responding with more maybe open-ended questions or reframing the situation or like making a proposal for what to do, what action could be taken or how to kind of move forward. Some examples could be like, hey, will you tell me more about your experience, rather than them harassing somebody else? Or I wonder if this other person is also hoping for some respect or consideration or a way to be part of the community. And so the last A is for add. Sometimes if things really simmer, you can kind of add further resources like, hey, go check out this group, go online and read this article, watch this documentary, read this book, whatever you think might kind of be relevant. All right, so here's our scenario, and I'm going to invite you into groups here to kind of work with this, or you can pick a totally different scenario if you like as well. So I'm just going to read it. This is something that happens in kind of a local neighborhood situation, kind of like the plaza that I described earlier. So several people are sitting or standing close to one another on a low wall in the plaza. And some of them seem drunk or tired or trying to sleep or eat. One of the group approaches a man who's sitting down and demands a sip of his beverage in a raised voice. And the man with the beverage refuses to share. So the man standing up knocks the beverage out of the man's hand and yells at him, "You're so selfish and stupid. You just sit here and drink day after day." The man sitting kind of complains, but doesn't really do much else. And then the man standing up keeps yelling and says, "You don't care about anyone but yourself. Other people have struggles also. My days are effing messed up also. People ignore me every day." So if you were there as part of a peace team or a community safety unit, how might you respond? Whether it's using Clara or maybe some other kinds of tactics. So one of the first things you could think about is, if you were listening for what this person is kind of saying, what might be a feeling that you think they're experiencing? And you can put that in the chat box or you can unmute if you like. I see not frustration, loneliness, ignored. Okay. And what might be an unmet need that's behind what they're doing? like a need to be seen, perhaps. A need for community, connection. Excellent. So then when you start to acknowledge, you might identify some of those and see if that kind of starts to shift the dynamic in a better kind of direction. So I'm going to put this scenario here in the chat box. And so you should be able to access it when you go into breakout rooms. You can also pick a different scenario if you prefer something else that you want to kind of work with, either with Clara or try some other tactics. So you'll have about 8 to 10 minutes and invite you to role play this, where you have one person who's kind of the aggressor and at least one person who's trying to intervene. You could have another person who's kind of observing, or they can sort of slide in to the scenario in some way. But once you identify your roles, take about 30 seconds to kind of get into your role. Like, what are you sort of feeling? What experience is behind what you're doing or about to do? And then go ahead and dive in and try to make it somewhat challenging, particularly if you're the aggressor. Don't just sort of stop so super quickly, right? Like, try to have the other person shift some tactics. It's not an Oscar tryout or audition. So, this is just small scale role play, have some fun, but also try to experience it in your bodies. And then you should have time to possibly role play it a couple times so you could switch roles and experience it from different kind of perspectives. All right, any questions before we go into breakout groups? So Rivera, could you break them up into groups of 3 or 4? And we'll give you about 8 to 10 minutes.
All right, here you go. If anything goes wrong, come back here and we'll get you sorted.
In terms of the role play, what sort of tactics seemed possibly helpful or tactics that didn't seem so helpful? Floor is open for whoever would like to share. Evan.
I'm a big fan of the distract tactic in bystander intervention. However, I feel like that maybe wouldn't be the move here because this is a man who is feeling ignored already. And if you put that full focus on the victim, it could, I think, potentially further escalate with him. And that seems like he might be someone who needs some attention or something like that. So I feel like trying to start with a focus on him would hopefully be beneficial, but you also run the risk of him being like, I didn't ask you, or I want this, like, get out of, this is none of your business or whatever. But I still feel like initially I think I'd go for him instead of the victim in this case.
When you say him, you mean the person who's like being aggressive?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Just like, trying to do that, empathize, acknowledge, like, what's going on, man? You having some trouble? Like, can I buy you a drink if you have the resources to do that? But in some way try to make him feel less ignored, especially with that last statement being, I get ignored every day. It seems like that's a big thing for him in that moment.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent insights. So that's a little different than like trying to go in and say, well, you're wrong for doing this, you're right for doing that, or trying to like figure out who to blame and all that. Right? This is rooted in how do we rehumanize, deepen empathy, meet the unmet needs. Colleen?
I had a lot of trouble sort of thinking on my feet, especially while trying to follow the conversation and listen at the same time and sort of understand what was going on. And that wasn't really something that I had kind of thought about before I tried to be the sort of mediator.
Okay. So it can be challenging to kind of come up with something in a moment of intensity. And so it might take some more time to listen, or sometimes we sort of just aren't sure what to do. And one of the other tactics is to try to delegate and see who else around us might be willing, able to help, or maybe even have more credibility than we might have in a particular context. And how might they be able to kind of support or take the lead? Karen and then Robert.
I'm going to tell a tale on myself. I'm afraid my usual go-to is humor, which can backfire bigly, which is why I'm saying this. I sort of pretended I was sidling up to the fellow and said, "Ooh, you don't want to drink his stuff. It's got backwash in it." And, offer him an unopened bottle as if I really had one, or, suggest that there was a better way. I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but that would be my default
Mhm.
setting. And so that's why I wanted to raise it in case I tried it and it was a big mistake.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, right? Like part of this is like our personalities and our style. And if humor or kind of a distraction that's kind of humorous kind of fits well with you and you give it a whirl. And, if it's something you've been practicing, you probably have a little extra skill at it perhaps, and you see how it lands. And if it goes in a better direction, then you kind of keep leaning with that. If it seems to escalate or like not go in a good direction, then it's a signal to shift to um, maybe Clara, or we'll talk about dignity phrases here in a moment, which are like short phrases to try to rehumanize the people. So yeah, it's a sign to maybe try shift a different direction. Yeah, Robert.
One issue my group faced is one that I've faced in reality many times myself, which is if the harasser has some problems that need to be dealt with, how much do you offer specific help for those problems? You go to the point where I've got all these problems and I need this. Would you like me to? You don't have a place to stay. Would you like me to walk with you and show you where a shelter is that you can go? Is that a? I have fallen. I tend to be a helper in situations like that. I intervene and then take the person by the hand and get myself into trouble quite often doing that. So that was an issue that came up in ours, how far to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tricky question. It's kind of gray area. Sounds like you've tried it sometimes, and if you have sort of the time and the knowledge about where to go or where to connect them, and you're relatively confident that you can um, kind of feel safe enough in that process. Um, that is an option. Um, Sometimes we can connect people by giving them a phone number or an address, and letting them kind of take the next step if they want to take it. Yeah, it's a discernment. Anne, what do you want to share? So Anne, I think you're on mute still.
I work down at St. Vincent de Paul's, and we have about 100 people there every morning. And so instead of trying to solve things most of the time, I try to, being this was like a group in a scenario, I usually try to say, "Oh, what's been happening?" And there's usually a lot more to the story than just somebody knocking one little cup out of somebody's hand of what's going on. And everybody is speaking up and saying, "Oh, well, this happened, that happened." And and sometimes, they have the answer themselves that they'll come up for the group. And I always think that's a little bit healthier if they can start solving their own problems and what's they're doing and what's going on and that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Right. Sometimes it's just about shifting the attention or slowing things down or creating a little bit of space where someone in the group can, take a moment to like think of a different approach or another kind of option for how they're moving forward. Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm just going to repost the summary document. I don't know if some people came in a little bit later, but make sure folks have that. Again, that'll be emailed out afterwards. I want to go through about 6 or 7 other tactics here, particularly when dialogue just doesn't seem to be working, or we're not sure what to say, or they don't want to talk, right? There's just kind of a degree of intensity. So let's go through some other tactics. I'll give you a few examples, and then we should have a chunk of time for just kind of like general questions or scenarios or input that you would like to share. So the first tactic here that I mentioned briefly was dignity phrases. So these are phrases that it's not about kind of having a dialogue, but just short phrases we can say that can rehumanize parties involved. Sometimes if there's a person clearly being harassed, it might be phrases like, hey, she's part of our community. She's a person like you. She has people that care about her. She cares about others. God loves her, right? Phrases like that. Towards a person who might be more of an aggressor, you might say, hey, your ideas matter. You're valuable. You're better than this. You're more creative than that behavior. The next one, asking questions or giving options. Like, what is going on here? What do you need? Are there other options? I wonder how this person is feeling with what you're saying or doing. Oftentimes when people may have a weapon in a situation, such as when they pull out a knife, particularly like at the plaza or different kinds of contexts, it's more often an attempt to control and intimidate rather than it is to try or intend to kind of really hurt somebody. So if you can provide some off-ramps, that can often de-escalate the situation. So for example, if somebody has a knife and you say, hey, I'll listen to what you have to say. If you can just take a deep breath for a moment, or, we can find a way through this if you put the weapon away. I'll share with you a knife story here with this next tactic. This is called interconnectedness or solidarity phrases. Again, not a long dialogue conversation, but short phrases. So interconnectedness phrases often begin with the word we or let's. For example, we are one community. We can find a way through this. We can meet everyone's needs. Or let's do this together. Let's break this cycle of hostility or violence. Let's find a way out. Solidarity phrases are short phrases that share a bit of struggle or suffering. So it could be things like, if you're the de-escalator, I've been really afraid before also. Or I've been really angry before as well. Or I've had a hard time with some relationships. I've messed up before. Or I am really frustrated with this institution or this democracy as well. Here's an example of the knife incident. This happened in DC. Down by the White House, there's a plaza called Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is kind of a couple blocks, which used to have Black Lives Matter written on it. And this was this was January 6, 2021, when the insurrection at the Capitol happened. And there were some peace team members down by this plaza near the White House. And a big, tall white guy in camouflage started walking down the sidewalk. And he started looking into the plaza and kind of pointing at someone. And they started kind of talking and then calling each other names. The other guy started yelling back, and they get out onto the street, and they're about 4 feet away from each other at this point. And the white guy reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this long black curved knife. He's like, "What are you going to do now? What are you going to do?" The other guy was like, oh, I got something. There's a peace team member kind of monitoring this. They got up about 4 feet away from the guy with the knife, and they put their hands up and they said, "Let's slow down. You don't need the knife. You can put it away. It's not going to help anything here." And the guy with the knife just kind of took a quick glance, maybe half a step back. But it's in that moment that his buddies who were just watching on the sidewalk, they come out and they pull him back and they say, let's go. It's not worth it. It's not worth it." The two guys kept kind of yelling at each other, but the fight doesn't happen. Right? The interconnectedness phrase was, let's slow down. Let's slow down. Last one on here is delegate. Again, this is if we're not sure we're the right person or the best person, or we can't think of anything to do. So we try to find another credible messenger in the space. Again, it could be based on gender or age or color, or maybe a staff person or a religious leader, community leader that we think might have more credibility or kind of a better chance to de-escalate. All right, one more set of 4, and then we'll pause here for some more conversation. Peel away enablers. So sometimes there is more than one person who's being aggressive. It might be 2 or maybe a group of 5, but there's kind of like one person who's out front who's really trying to be like really rude or intimidating and, almost show off for their friend or their buddies. So instead of going towards the most aggressive person right away, like at a demonstration, for example, or some other event, you can start by engaging one of their enablers, like the person or persons behind them that are kind of laughing or pointing with him, or maybe just trying to look intimidating. And you engage them with either a distraction, like, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" Or, "I like those shoes. Where did you get those?" Or like, "Would you talk with me for just a second?" And it kind of starts to, peel away the supportive energy, and the most aggressive person may often kind of soon like bring it down or look back and like, "Where's my friend or where are my buddies?" We actually had this at a demonstration happen here in DC. A group of like 4 or 5 guys went into a counter protest area, and they were like looking for trouble, and the one guy was super aggressive, and we engaged with one of the enablers, and we were like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Like, this is like counter, why are you in this area? And he was like, "Oh, well, we just came down to the area to like go fishing." And we were like, "Oh, really? You came to go fishing? What kind of fish you looking for?" And we had this conversation about fishing, right? He was trying to be funny and not like really answer the question. So we talked about fishing for 30 seconds, a minute. It kind of peeled some of the energy away. And then some other folks came in and we were able to like walk the group out of that space. All right. Last couple ones, distance. Sometimes it's about getting people apart. Can you sit over here? Can we walk across the street? Can we walk down this block? Delay is you check on someone who's been harassed afterwards because you weren't maybe sure what to do or weren't ready to kind of jump in, but it can mitigate some of the trauma. It doesn't stop the immediate harm, but it can help with minimize some of the trauma. So last one, this is interposition. This is a little higher risk tactic. It involves different ways we use our bodies. Sometimes it's about physically being closer to the situation. It can be what we do with our hands. We talked about this and kind of this. It can also be about, standing in between people, or sitting in between, or even sitting nearby and asking others to kind of sit to bring it down. One of the things we mention here with interposition is that there are times in life when physical force may not be equivalent with violence. So, for example, if someone's out on a street and they're about to get hit by a car, and you run out and push them out of the way, it's physical force, but we're not like dehumanizing them or causing significant harm. So it is more aligned with kind of active nonviolence. Same thing when we're like a community safety unit or we're de-escalating, there may be moments where we put our hands up to block someone who's trying to push or maybe hit another person. Or we might hold someone's arm or hold someone's hand who seems to be getting really physically escalated. Or we might pull somebody off of another person if they're like wrestling on the ground or something like that. So there can be ways that physical force can be part of an active nonviolent response. The other forms of interposition is sometimes if someone's really kind of yelling at another person, you can just stand in front of that aggressor. You don't say anything, but you just start taking like little baby steps towards them, and they might try to maintain their own space and they might keep yelling at someone, but you've sort of walked them back 3 feet or 5 feet. If you got a few of you, you can form a V around someone and walk them back, or a circle. You always want an exit in the back. You can also form a circle around a person who's being harassed to protect them from getting pushed or hit, and even to walk them out of a scene. So we have a whole other training on like nonviolent self-defense, which is like a range of body movements and moves that you can make that can protect without hurting. And some of the top line things are, about keeping your sort of eyes and nose protected, your throat, your stomach, and your groins. Because if you get hit in any of those areas, you could be hurt or taken down. So one of the things the instructor talks about is if someone's coming kind of towards you in a straight line, it's better to kind of stand at an angle to them so that you can spin to the right or the left and either continue to de-escalate or kind of get out of the space. So I'll end this just with a quick story of again, a knife incident in the plaza. 2 guys got riled up and one guy ripped his shirt off and they were kind of circling each other in that circle of the plaza. And one of the guys pulled the knife out. And instead of us going to the knife, we went to the guy who didn't have the knife and we went up to him and said, hey, like you don't want to get hurt. Like this could be really bad. You don't want this to happen. And that wasn't like quite getting him to like get out of the scene. So we put our hands kind of like gently on their chest and we started to try to kind of walk them back a little bit and say like, you don't want to get hurt. You could end up getting really hurt bad. Like we can find another option. And we were able to kind of gradually walk him across the street. One of the notable things was when he finally got him to sit down, he started like, there's so much craziness in the world. He's like, look at what's happening in Ukraine and nobody's helping. And look at what's happening in our city. And all this stuff came pouring out. He finally told us about his like 1-year-old son. And we were like, your son really wants to see you tonight. And your son really cares about you. He wants to be with his dad. And he had some tears and, he was able to kind of bring it down. The other guy with the knife eventually came over without the knife and, apologized and said, thank you for kind of intervening. So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions or other scenarios you'd like to discuss a little bit. You'll see in the summary document, there's a few other pieces around like strategy in terms of like, if you're a community safety unit, how do you prepare ahead of time for an event? Like gathering intel, identifying roles, describing your plan. So we have other trainings that really go into like creating a plan for certain events, but it's a little bit of detail there. So any questions or like reflections that you want to share?
I have a question to start us off, Eli, and then I see Ruth is ready to go. So for Campaign Nonviolence Action Days, we're encouraging people to actually start the process of thinking about how could you organize a local team in your local area. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a big thing like DC Peace Team is so amazing or Nonviolent Peace Force is huge. But like even a small group that could provide a little protective accompaniment or community safety efforts. What are the steps that people should start with now in order to actually provide that kind of support at an event in, say, September?
Yeah, thanks, Rara. So, we actually have a document for kind of how to get started, and I can put that in the kind of follow-up email. But I think, some basic things are there other people that you know that are kind of interested in doing that or have some degree of kind of knowledge about it? Trying to bring them together and see if there's kind of shared interest. And then another piece is, um, what's happening in your community, right? Is there a certain event you're thinking about that might be have some challenges, or is there certain parts of the neighborhood? Um, and then to engage with the stakeholders who are going to be part of that event or live in that area, and see how they're planning for the event or what some of the needs are, um, and then exploring if it would be supportive to have a community safety team there. And another, really important piece is training, to make sure the people that do that have adequate training. Usually we do like a 4-hour training for an intro to unarmed protection for a group that's going to kind of be on the streets or at an event. And then there's shadowing that happens if possible ahead of time, and so forth. So those would be some general tips, but I will share kind of a broader tip doc in the follow-up. Ruth?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier eye contact with the person who's maybe being the victim of aggression, but not particularly with the aggressor. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a gray area. It's not like an absolute rule per se, but usually if there's someone who's being harassed, before maybe saying anything to them, if you can make eye contact so they know that somebody's there, somebody's seeing what's happening. Sometimes you can sort of tell through the eyes that they're looking for help, or maybe they got it, right? And then once you do that, then maybe you verbalize like, are you okay? Do you want me to do anything? Would you like me to sit here or walk you somewhere? Eye contact with an aggressor, sometimes that lands fine and you can kind of use it to like get their focus on you rather than somebody else. And, maybe you have some thoughtful words that really gets their attention, but it can also function to have them feel like you're challenging them, or you might even be aggressive towards them if they don't really know what you're up to. So it could escalate with an aggressor. So you just got to be careful about how you use it and kind of what you say when you're making eye contact. So those are just some of the conditions to think about. Any other scenarios you'd like to discuss, or experiences you've had that you want to share that you think would be helpful for others to learn about? Or questions?
Eli, Sue Ellen here. I'm coming in from Chicago, and I'm interested today more. You had the scenario you gave us. You have relationships with people on the plaza. I'm here for this training today, more like random, like riding the bus, riding the L, riding the train, and I guess one of the questions, maybe there's a whole other training around this, but the use of social media or phones to document an escalation when it's happening. I mean, it could be weaponized because people can be seeking attention, and it can be kind of, then or it could be used to kind of record something and make sure that justice is meted. But can you say anything about that?
About documentation, like with the video?
Yeah, because it's almost like it can be another element within the escalation process.
Yeah, so that's definitely another tactic. And it can be helpful, like, you know, when we're not sure what else to do, or it seems kind of particularly intense and we aren't ready to kind of take any more risk. So, you know, holding up our phones to video or to take pictures can be one way to kind of shift the energy. You know, it's a form of presence, kind of visibility. Yeah, you want to be, you don't want to kind of like put that on social media, particularly without, you know, a person who's being harassed, without their permission, for example. Um, but you also want to be careful, like how you do it. Like if you take the phone and you go up to someone's face and you're like, yeah, what are you saying? I got this, right? Like it can be kind of an escalatory move, right? It's threatening. It's in a way, it's um, not particularly humanizing. So, you know, you need to be careful with how you use the video and the distance, and if you're saying anything, what else you're saying along with that. But a lot of these tactics that we've gone through are applicable even if we don't have relationships with people. You know, distraction, dignity phrases, delegate, interposition. These are all things we've used at political demonstrations where we don't really know these folks ahead of time, or if you're on the bus or the metro and so forth. So just to kind of flag that. Yeah, Mary?
Thanks, Eli. I just have a quick story to share about the power of nonviolence and how doing this kind of work can really change us as well as the recipient of our work. And I shared this earlier in our breakout session. Very quickly, a group of us have been meeting outside the US mission for the last year and a half every Thursday, protesting against the policy against Gaza. And we meet all kinds of people, you can imagine. But a few weeks ago, an elderly man came up and was very, very upset with us. An elderly Jewish man, very thin, very frail, shaking with anger. And he said, "Why are you doing this?" He said, "God gave us this land. God gave us this land. Why are you here? You're doing evil." And I was so angry at him at first, so angry at him. But watching this old man cry and wail, I suddenly felt a conversion, a nonviolent conversion in myself. And I just reached out my hand and said, "Sir, I am so sorry about your pain." And just with those few words, the man changed. He embraced me. He grabbed my hand. He started kissing my arm. He said, "Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam." And it wasn't because I agreed with him, but it was because I suddenly saw him as a suffering person, and I felt myself suffering as a consequence. And so it's very powerful to feel the suffering of the people that you're ostensibly trying to help, but it really affects you as well.
Thank you. Georgia, do you want to go next? Do you have it?
Yeah. First of all, that was a really moving anecdote. So thank you, Mary, for that. And thank you for the soul training. It's been really wonderful for me. I'm new to this world, but very excited. And I was noticing in our breakout room with the role play, when somebody intervened, I was playing the aggressor. When somebody intervened, it totally took my attention away and de-escalated that initial interaction. But then I was sort of acting aggressive toward that person. So what do you do when that happens? When it just gets kind of deflected toward you, and then now you're in a potentially violent interaction with somebody?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And this is, you know, this is a risk in this work, whether you're part of community safety unit or just kind of in a one-on-one situation. One of the things that can mean is that the tactic we use to get their attention may not be adequate, and that it's important to shift to a different tactic, right? So if we use distraction and they come at us in a hostile way, then we might not want to continue to distract, but to try to either use dignity phrases or Clara. And sometimes the Clara piece of just like listening a little bit longer, right? Listening to what they want to say, even if it's got a lot of anger or hostility, and then trying to acknowledge the pain, like that Mary gave the example. So I think if that situation happens, it's usually about shifting to a different tactic, or maybe, you know, even delegating and seeing if there's somebody else in the immediate area that will come and like help you out or stand by you while you're kind of trying to work through this. But yeah, there's not many times where like, at least we've experienced, where we've gotten somebody's attention away from somebody else and they've really just totally gone after us. I mean, there might be a moment they're a little escalated, but usually you can kind of shift that in a better direction. But there might be some moments where it's just like better to try to get out of there and to like create distance, you know. So you be ready for that. I know we're pretty close to time here. Rivera, we have one more hand up. Do you want me to take it, or do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Colleen. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. My question was more sort of what to do in a scenario where like there's someone who has hinted that they will be aggressive, but there's sort of not contact. This happened with my pastor at my church was assaulted when he walked out after mass. He had hints during mass that this person here would do this, and then when he walked out, it happened. I don't actually know the details of it, but whether there could be like sort of how you would maybe approach that, where they're not saying anything yet, but there's these hints of something bad might happen.
You mean like before like the service, he knew that this person might approach him afterwards? That was kind of
During it, he saw them, knew that they didn't belong to the church. They were
Yeah.
behaving poorly, like crumbling the communion at a Catholic church, which is considered very, very bad.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like that early warning, early response thing, right? When we start to see indicators like you described. So, like, what are some steps that can be done before there's a more intense confrontation? I mean, in like a church setting, you know, I think one option is that you have a couple people there that are trained as kind of de-escalators, and they're kind of responsible for trying to engage ahead of time before he gets to the pasture, I guess, in this case. If you don't have that, you know, then, you know, sometimes there are people who just kind of have those skills who might be willing to kind of step in. But if you're the pastor and you're kind of in that moment, you know, I would, you know, I guess, you know, try the kind of dignity phrases to the other person to try to rehumanize them or humanize them, you know, with the sense that might mitigate what they're thinking of doing, or having one or two people in the parish like with you as a pastor when you're trying to like engage with somebody. Those are some things that could be options.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
the earlier you intervene, the better usually. Rivera?
Great. Thank you so much, Eli, for your graciousness of spirit and time and your wealth of experience that you've brought and shared with us today. The very practical skills, the kind of deep philosophy behind it. At Pace Bene and with Campaign Nonviolence, we really believe that the power of active nonviolence is transformative and liberational for ourselves, our families, our communities, society, and the whole world. And we're really grateful to each one of you for joining us on this journey today, and know that many of you are walking alongside us on the long arc of this journey as well. So we want to thank you for that. We will send out a follow-up email with all kinds of links and information, so keep your eye out for that. It will come from Millie Rozon, our educational coordinator. This training has been done as part of our planning for the Campaign Nonviolence Action Days in September 21 to October 2nd, where we're helping people step into their power of nonviolence towards self, towards others, towards the whole world through social movements, and towards the earth. If you'd like to take a minute right now and write into the chat box something that was really meaningful for you today, a new tool, a new understanding, a new way of looking at these situations, please take a second and pop that in there so that both Eli, myself, and Shayna, and everyone else on the call know what really stood out for you, what was valuable. Some role plays and feedback, dignity phrases. Yeah, that's good for a lot of people. New term, Clara. Nonviolent practices, changing ourselves, patience, peeling away those enablers, the real life stories, interconnectedness, listening first, and maybe underestimating the power of that listening. Yeah, the simplicity and utility of these techniques. And all of it was perfect, says Chris. Stories, practical techniques, breakouts, and a chance to practice. The hand gesture, wonderful. Yeah, so this is a teaser. It's a taste of what you can dig into. And Eli's been really great about mentioning and naming the next kind of steps of training that you can do. I've put the DC Peace Team's link into the chat box. Please follow it and go find these trainings and go deeper. Because as many of you have mentioned today, even if you're not coordinating a group, wherever you are, you can be an agent of change, ready to step up and intervene. And these skills are something we carry with us, that live within us as a living toolbox. And in these times, we know we need those tools. And we need thousands of people to have those tools. Forget thousands. Hundreds of millions of people need these tools. So be both a nonviolent warrior in that sense, and also be an ambassador of this work. If it's had meaning for you today, go tell someone else to come to the next class with you. Eli, any last words you'd like to say before we finish?
Just a deep sense of gratitude. You know, it's wonderful to be with folks who are kind of open and leaning into this way of active nonviolence. I think it's got so much potential for each of us personally and collectively. So I appreciate learning from so many on this call who have journeyed with me. And I just kind of wish you well in staying connected and the adventure ahead. Yeah, and we will send out a summary doc with all the tactics and examples, and hope to see you down the road. So peace be with you.
And now your turn. Feel free to come off mute and say a farewell and thank you to each other as you hop off.
Thank you, Eli.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Until
Great day.
Aloha.
Great
Great
weekend.
everyone showing up here, making the world a peaceful place.
Thanks, all. Thanks, Greg.
Blessings.